what do you know about Roswell? Right? Do you think you know everything? The most famous UFO case in the history of mankind, in my opinion, in the world, right? Roswell, 1947. Roswell, New Mexico. Did a craft containing bodies get covered up by the U.S. government? Was there just one craft? How many bodies? Were they still alive? Where are those bodies? Where are those craft? Let's find out. Because in Luis Elizondo's latest interview on Glenn Beck, he tells the full story of what happened at Roswell, what happened with the craft, and what happened with these bodies. And he held the material from the craft in his hand. That's according to Luis Elizondo, okay? He's personally saying he held pieces of the Roswell crash in his hand and that it's been studied by multiple laboratories, including JPL from NASA, right? And they're saying they have no idea how this was made back then, right? In the late 40s. Impossible to have been made. Well, not impossible to have been made, but impossible to have been made by humans. So here's the first clip. Luis Elizondo on Glenn Beck.
What happened that day and what is left? How much of this material, were there bodies?
Yeah.
Tell me what happened that day.
So as the report goes, there was actually two incidents. There was two crashes, not one. And one was partially recovered, and there were biological specimens inside, allegedly 4, and they were very quickly whisked away, taken to the military base to lock them down. They didn't want the locals touching them or getting a hold of them. And of course, we know what happened after that, which was this campaign to say, oh, no, these are Mylar balloons and stuff like that. No, these were crash test dummies that came down. Well, that's interesting because we weren't using dummies back then for some of these tests. We weren't using dummies until later. So these specimens were looked at. I don't know where they went after that, and where the material went after that. The trail gets kind of cold. Turns out later that there was another U.S. military installation, Wright-Patterson in Ohio, that also was involved in looking at material of crashed unknown vehicles of unknown origin. And it's there's even some very interesting documentation out there if you know where to find it. Again, that's completely unclassified. Anybody can look at it. There's a site called the Black Vault. The gentleman who runs that has a huge library of Freedom of Information Act releases that the U.S. government, the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, the Department of Defense, the DIA have all released over the years. And there's a treasure trove of these documents. And when you start reading these documents and realizing these are official government documents to the director of the FBI, from the director of the FBI to the director of the CIA, the National Security Council, these are real. These are legit. This is not Lou Elizondo telling you this. This is your government telling you this. And I think this is part of my
government always lies to us. So
sure. Yeah, no, touche, of course. But, a lieutenant colonel that's there in the field writing a report, they're not lying to you. A politician, maybe. A senior person that's trying to cover their butt, yeah. But, a low-level lieutenant colonel who's there, who's an MP, military police, who's just writing the report to his general, they're not lying to you. That's a real report written by a real individual about a real occurrence.
All right, so there's 2 crashes, not just one. And to be honest, I've covered this part of the story before on the podcast, and it was Hal Puthoff who told Luis Elizondo that. And it was one of the very first things Hal Puthoff ever told Luis Elizondo, because that's what Luis Elizondo claimed in his new book, Imminent, right? And I think it's probably one of the first stories that convinced Luis Elizondo there's more to this UFO thing, right? But, where does it go from there, right? What are we going to do about Roswell? Right? And this information, I guess. Like, what do we do with it? Regardless, in this next clip of the interview, he talks about the material, right? And personally holding it in his hands. Now, the assumption is made that the material is from Roswell, right? And you'll see in the clip why. But also, that's literally what Glenn Beck tweeted out. Former Pentagon UFO hunter Luis Elizondo tells me he personally held the material recovered from the 1947 Roswell incident. There were 2 crashes, not one. The material requires a degree of tech to manufacture that did not exist at the time it was found, at least with humans. So if anyone in the comments is going to be like, he's not talking about the material from Roswell, I'm just going off the information that was reported, right? You can make the decision for yourself. He's definitely talking about a material from the past because of how he talks about it. So, look, let's just listen to it, and then we can discuss and erase all this confusion. Here we go.
So have you been allowed to see anything? I mean, I assume there's been other crashes. Have you been able to actually see this evidence with your own eyes, the actual physical evidence?
Yeah, I actually gave a briefing to a senior member of the Department of Defense in 2017, several briefings, about the material that I personally have held in my hand. I have held it in my hand, and so have other individuals that, and I'm not going to say who they were, that worked for very, very high-end aerospace companies, best of the best. And they're looking at this from an engineering perspective, and they're scratching their head. They're saying, I mean, I can see it, I believe it, but I can't believe this material was found back then. And under those circumstances, this material, we did not have the engineering capability. It isn't an engineered piece of material. It's layered. It was studied by NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. It's been studied by other organizations as well. And of course, that's really the gold standard, isn't it? When you have material that you can analyze and you can look at that material and succinctly say, yeah, this material is very special and it requires an X degree amount of technology to manufacture or reproduce. And frankly, it did not exist at the time the material was found, at least not with us, with humans.
So Luis Elizondo gave a briefing to the Department of Defense about this material, right? And it's been studied by all these labs, and they can't determine how it was made back then. Well, my biggest question is, where did this material come from? And I don't mean it was from the Roswell crash, Patrick. I mean, was it in the possession of private hands this whole time and given to Luis Elizondo, and he was told it was from Roswell? Or did he see any evidence, some sort of paper trail, right? Because at the end of the day, how do we know it's from that location and that time period, right? Was it in the U.S. government's possession the whole time? And if it was, how did Luis Elizondo get a hold of it, right? And these studies that were done of the material, right? What about the studies that were done back then? Or what? That's my biggest question. Like, where has that material been from 1947 to, 2017, 2018 when he was giving these briefings? And where's that material now? But that's my biggest question. What's the chain of command? How do we know where this material came from and what was happening with it this whole time? And how did Luis Elizondo hold it in his hands? And who gave it to him to hold in his hands? Was it Hal Puthoff? Was it someone else? Again, that's my biggest question. How do we prove that material is from that event? That's the most important thing to prove first before you study the material. Study the material and this and that. But how do we connect it to Roswell? Right? How do we connect that material to Roswell? That's what I would like to see. And let's be real. Why even study the material? You got bodies. You got alien bodies. That's all the proof you need. You don't need to study the material. I mean, yeah, I guess you do, study it, sure. But if we want to know what's not made by humans, those bodies, where are the bodies? So that to me is it. Why forget UFOs? That can be confused as our tech or that this tech, that country's tech, whatever. But alien bodies, that's nobody's going to be like, oh, those are from China. There's no confusion there. The focus should be on the bodies. And then from there, connecting that piece of material to Roswell. Where's that paperwork, or how do we know that? So I find this quite fascinating, right? Especially if that is the claim. Luis Elizondo held in his hand pieces of the Roswell crash, right? And had that studied. And what did the DOD say after these briefings? What was their reaction to the briefings, and what was put in place afterwards? Is this what, and why didn't Arrow study it? Did they get these reports? Did they see it? Is that what helped push along maybe some of this UAP legislation? Because why is there such a divide, right? People like Chuck Schumer and everyone else who is supporting the UAP legislation versus people like Sean Kirkpatrick and Arrow, right? And I think they have a new director and maybe another new one. But the Arrow office, right? The office from the Pentagon to study UFOs, right? They released that famous historical report. Nothing to see here. No evidence of aliens or UFOs. What about this material? What do they say about these reports? So just curious, right? Just curious, just asking questions. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed today's video. And I love talking about Roswell. Again, it's like the quintessential UFO case, and I'm fascinated by it. And there's a lot of inconsistencies with it. It's true, right? The government story about what happened. Oh, it was test dummies and this and that. And Luis Elizondo's right. That stuff came out way later. It wasn't even invented yet. So even the government's quote unquote story about what happened and that it, was this balloon they were testing, there's just a lot of inconsistencies to the story, which is what makes it intriguing, right? So I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you think. We'll see you guys on tomorrow's video. My interview with the big homie CC is finally coming out tomorrow. So it got delayed one day only, but it will be out tomorrow, so I'm sure you're wondering. If not, go check out my latest videos for the big homie CC, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. It says bodyguard, all right, celebrity bodyguard, with a lot of stories to tell, and I cannot wait to share that. So, all right, we'll see you on tomorrow's episode. Don't forget, every day's a gift, y'all. Peace!
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in the cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep.